The night my HOA president called the cops on my wife, my driveway lit up like a crime scene. Red and blue lights bouncing off my garage door, while my neighbors stood in the dark, pretending not to stare. And there, in the middle of all that mess, was this woman who thought she ran the neighborhood, insisting my wife was a prostitute, sneaking into some poor man's house at all hours. The officers had no clue that the woman they were side-eyeing on my front porch was actually a judge, and what none of us knew in that moment was that the next time my HOA president saw my wife, it wouldn't be under those flashing lights. It would be in a courtroom with my wife on the bench and her whole little empire on the line. You hear stuff like this online and think it's exaggerated, but I'm telling you straight, this really happened to me. And yeah, that happened. My name's Mike Hanley. I'm 53, a union electrician with more scars than savings, and a back that complains louder than I do. I've spent most of my life on job sites, crawling through attics, fixing messes people never see. And when I wasn't working, I was usually at the hospital, watching wires and tubes keep my first wife alive a little longer. Cancer took her 8 years ago, and after that, it was just me and my son, and a stack of medical bills that never seemed to shrink. I did what a lot of people do. I threw myself into work, took every overtime shift I could, told myself love was a young guy's game, and I was done with all that. Then, one day, I was teaching this continuing education class on electrical safety for contractors. Boring stuff about breakers and ground fault interrupters, and this woman walks in with a leather notebook and this focused look on her face like she actually wanted to be there. She sat in the front row, asked smart questions, laughed at my dumb analogies, and after class, she walked up and said, "You explain that better than the book. You got time for a cup of coffee so I can steal a few more examples." That was Elena. Coffee turned into dinners, turned into weekends, and little by little my house stopped feeling like a museum of everything I'd lost and started feeling like a home again. She was careful about her job. Always said law stuff downtown, a lot of paperwork, nothing exciting. And I didn't push. I was just happy to have someone who made me forget about hospitals and lawyers for a while. We got married in a courthouse 3 months before everything blew up. No big wedding, no fancy dress, just me, her, my son, and a judge. Who mispronounced my last name. Elena kept her name, Ruiz. Said she worked too hard to build her career under that name, to let it go. But she smiled and told me, "On everything that matters, I'm yours." She started moving in slowly, boxes of law books, files, a coffee machine that made real coffee instead of whatever sludge I'd been drinking, a couple of suits that looked way too expensive for my closet. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe I get a second shot at a normal life. The problem was, we lived in Maple Grove Estates. Maple Grove is one of those neighborhoods that looks like a brochure. Perfect gravel yards, 3 shades of beige. The HOA approved and nothing else. Mailboxes all lined up like soldiers, and when I first bought the house, people said the same thing. The HOA is strict, but that's how they keep the riffraff out. I never asked who the riffraff was supposed to be. I just paid my dues. Mowed when they told me and tried not to make waves. The queen bee of Maple Grove was Beverly Cross, our HOA president, mid-50s ton. That never faded hair, sprayed into place like a helmet, and a clipboard glued to her hand she did. Inspections every morning. Walking the streets in a tracksuit with her phone out. Zooming in on trash cans that weren't exactly where they should be, and weeds you needed a magnifying glass to see. First month. I was there. She woke me up at 6 on a Sunday, pounding on my door. I opened up in sweatpants with pillow marks on my face, and she shoved a pink slip into my hand and said, Your rock border is uneven. This is a warning. Next time, it's a fine. I looked at the gravel she was pointing at and said, "They're rocks. They don't exactly line up at attention." And she gave me this tight little smile and said, "Standards matter here. Mr. Hanley, it starts with rocks and ends with property values dropping." I learned real fast that with Beverly, you either stayed out of her way or you became her next project. So I chose invisible, or at least I thought I did. When Elena started moving in, her schedule looked suspicious to somebody with too much free time and a pair of binoculars. She was working long days downtown. Some nights she'd roll in at 10:30, carrying a laptop bag and a box of books. Other nights, a friend would help her move a couple of things, and they'd park behind my truck to me. It was just what life looks like when you're building something to Beverly. It was a pattern she could twist. The night the cops showed up, Elena had texted me that she was running late. She walked in with her hair in a loose bun. Jacket over her shoulder, laptop bag, banging against her leg. I kissed her, took the box from her arms, and thought the hardest part of our day was over. Then the whole front of the house went red and blue. 2 patrol cars rolled up like they were serving a warrant. Neighbors cracked blinds. A few of them just came right outside and stood on their lawns pretending to water plants in the dark. Stepped out onto the porch, and 3 officers were already coming up the walk. Hands near their belts. Faces serious. "Evening, sir," the lead one said, polite but stiff. "We got a call about suspicious activity report. Said a woman has been entering this property at unusual hours. Caller was concerned she might be engaging in services." I swear my brain broke for a second. "Services," I repeated. And then I saw her, Beverly, standing at the edge of my yard in a silk robe and slippers, arms folded, chin up, playing the concerned citizen. She pointed straight at my door and said, "That's her. She shows up late. Different cars, different outfits. This is supposed to be a quiet family community." Elena stepped out next to me, still holding her laptop bag, looking between me, the cops, and Beverly, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. They asked for her ID, ran her name, asked me how long she'd been staying there, asked her where she worked, and the whole time Beverly kept tossing in little comments for the peanut gallery. I just didn't want anything inappropriate happening around the children. You never know what people are doing behind closed doors. The officers eventually realized there was nothing there. Told us they had to respond to every call. Apologized on the porch, then walked over and gently told Beverly that everything checked out. She pasted on a confused face like she couldn't imagine how she might have misinterpreted the situation. The cars left, the lights faded. The neighbors drifted back inside, and I shut the door to a house that suddenly felt smaller. Inside, Elena set her bag down and just looked at me. That mix of anger and hurt you get when someone slaps a label on you without even knowing your name. "So your HOA president thinks she gets to decide what kind of wife you can have now," she said quietly. Not yelling, not crying, just tired. We went to bed, but I didn't really sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the heater kick on and off, replaying that scene over and over, thinking about my workers. Comp claims still crawling through the system, thinking about how fast words like police and domestic situation and unstable can mess up a man's life. Part of me wanted to march across that street and give Beverly a piece of my mind. Part of me knew that if I did that, she'd win. Next morning, I tried to shrug it off, told Elena. Maybe Beverly just got carried away. Maybe now that the cops knew us, it'd be fine. I went to work, came back, and 3 days later, the next shot came. There was a bright notice tucked under the wiper of my work truck. A big white Ford with my tools in the back, the same truck that had been in that driveway for 3 years. Notice of violation. Unauthorized commercial vehicle. Fine $900. Beverly's name at the bottom like a signature on a piece of artwork. I brought it inside smelling like diesel and sweat, dropped it on the table in front of Elena, and tried to joke. Guess my truck is lowering the neighborhood IQ or something. She scanned it, and I watched her jaw tighten. She waited, Elena said. She was just waiting for a reason that looked technical, so it wouldn't sound personal on paper. The thing is, I remembered reading the rules when I moved in. There was this line about one work vehicle being allowed, if it was registered and parked in the driveway, no logos taller than a certain size. I followed all of that, but the violation letter conveniently ignored that part. $900 for something I knew wasn't actually against the rules and for a guy living on partial disability payments and side jobs. $900 was a heavy punch. Elena could have fixed it with one phone call. I could see it in her face, but she took a breath and shook her head. If I start using my job to swat away an HOA president because she offended me, I'm no better than she is, she said. But if she's going to use the book against you, then you better learn the book. So I went to the community center, asked for the bylaws, and they handed me this 3-inch thick binder that smelled like dust and bad decisions. I sat alone at a plastic table under buzzing fluorescent lights and started reading. I'm an electrician. My brain is wired for diagrams and rules. You follow a line, you see where it branches. You track where the power is supposed to go, and where it's shorting out. These covenants were the same way written to confuse people who don't have the time or energy to fight back. But if you sit with them long enough, the patterns show up. I found the section on commercial vehicles. It said exactly what I remembered when a work truck allowed registered no problem. Then I hit the part about street parking and stopped. No more than 2 vehicles may be parked on the street per household for more than 48 hours. If there was one house that broke that rule every single week, it was Beverly's. Her BMW, her husband's SUV, a revolving door of guests for what I later found out was her little side hustle with short-term rentals. That realization made something flip in my head. She wasn't just strict, she was selective, enforcing rules on people she didn't like, while ignoring the ones staring her in the face at her own curb. I started documenting every morning on my way to physical therapy. I'd drive past her house, snap a photo, write the date and time on the back when I got home. I printed the rule and highlighted it then. I did what I do best. I wired up a system. I installed 8 cameras around my property, 4K night vision motion alerts, all feeding to a hard drive in my workshop and a cloud backup. I joked that my house was more secure than some bank branches, but the truth was, I was scared and done being blindsided. A few nights later, around 2 in the morning, I got a motion alert on my phone. I checked the feed, half expecting to see a raccoon. And there was Beverly in pajama pants and a sweater, dragging a garden hose across her yard, right up against our property line. She wasn't watering plants. She was pacing on the rocks, letting the nozzle scrape and bump, making noise exactly where she'd complained about late-night disturbances coming from my side. I sat there in the blue glow of my phone and thought, okay, now we're playing my game. I saved that clip 3 different ways and named it Beverly Makes Her Own Noise. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with my own manila folder. The room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. The boards sat in their usual spots. 3 retirees and 1 guy who looked like he'd volunteered just so his wife would stop nagging him to get out of the house. Beverly sat at the head of the table like a CEO. Before I could open my mouth, she started her little performance, Before we address Mr. Hanley's appeal, she said loud enough that even the guy by the door heard, we need to talk about a situation at his address. She pulled out photos of my driveway shots of Elena getting out of a car at night and talked about unregistered individuals and unusual traffic and concerns about an unauthorized business. And I could feel heat crawling up my neck. Not just anger, but humiliation. Because she wasn't talking about code violations anymore. She was talking about my wife in front of people who saw us at the mailbox. Finally, I stood up slower than I wanted to, because my back was killing me, and walked to the front of the table. I laid out printed photos of her house with 4 cars along the curb, laid the highlighted rule next to them, and said, Section 7.3, no more than 2 vehicles on the street for more than 48 hours. All of these are your house. All of these are from the last 10 days. The board members leaned in. They recognized that stucco and those fancy planters. Beverly's smile went stiff. We're not here to discuss my property, she snapped. We're here because your behavior is concerning. I pulled out my marriage certificate and put it on top of her pictures. And for the record, I said, the unregistered individual is my wife, Elena. We got married 3 months ago at the courthouse. She works late, she carries law books. Not whatever you're trying to imply. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. Real wives don't sneak around at midnight carrying mysterious packages, she said. And I swear I felt my hands start to shake, not from fear this time, but from trying not to jump over the table. I took out my phone, hit play, and set it down, so the whole board could see the room filled with the grainy black and white video of Beverly at 2:15 a.m., clanking that hose on the rocks near my bedroom window, with the timestamp right there in the corner, the same time and place she'd complained about noise. One of the board guys actually muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Beverly's eyes flashed, but she caught herself, straightened her papers, and said, "This is clearly a personal vendetta. I move that we postpone discussing Mr. Hanley's violations until he provides proof of his wife's residency status." When that was the moment I knew she wasn't just going to lighten up and move on. She was locked in. Now she wasn't going to stop until one of us broke. And for a minute, honestly, I thought it might be me. The real breaking point came on a Saturday at Sunrise phone, ringing unknown number. I answered half asleep, thinking it was a wrong number or a scam. "Mr. Hanley, this is Officer Reed with Sun Valley PD." The voice said, "We received a report of domestic violence at your address. We need to come by and check on your wife." My stomach dropped through the floor 2 minutes later. I saw the cruiser pulling up. I stepped outside barefoot, still in a t-shirt and sweatpants. And there she was again. Beverly in her driveway. Robe slippers, phone in hand, waving toward my house like she was directing traffic. They asked me to step outside, then asked me to turn around. And I felt the cuffs go on cold metal on my wrists. In my own front yard, my son watching from the living room window face white. That image is burned into my brain, the way his hand lifted like he wanted to open the door and couldn't make himself do it. Inside, Elena talked to the officers. "Has he ever hit you, threatened? You thrown anything?" they asked. She looked at them like they were out of their minds and said, "Absolutely not." "Someone lied to you. They checked the house. They checked their body cameras. They checked the timeline of the call. And after 45 of the longest minutes of my life, they uncuffed me and apologized. Again. But apologies don't undo the feel of steel around your wrists or the looks on your neighbors' faces. And they sure don't erase phrases like domestic violence call from whatever notes get attached to your name. After they left, I sat on a stool in my workshop, shaking so hard my coffee sloshed out of the mug. I didn't know whether I was more angry or scared. I just knew I couldn't live like that, waiting for the next bogus call. That's when Elena came in, closed the door behind her, sat next to me and said, "Mike, there's something I should have told you sooner." I looked at her, waiting for those words every guy dreads, and instead she said, "I'm a municipal judge, new appointment, and my court covers this neighborhood." I just stared at her for a second, then laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain didn't know what else to do. "You're serious?" She nodded. "I wanted our first months to be about us, not about my job, and I definitely didn't want to use the robe to win an HOA pissing match," she said. "But what she's doing now, filing false reports, lying in writing, targeting you because of who you're married to, that's not just neighborhood drama anymore. That's criminal territory." She explained the ethics. She couldn't secretly coach me, couldn't whisper strategy, couldn't fix anything behind the scenes. But she could tell me the truth, that when you sign your name under a statement, and it turns out to be a lie, that's perjury. That calling the cops with a made-up story is filing a false report. And that when the person you're harassing happens to be a judge, a lot of people in that system are going to take interest. That conversation was the real twist in this whole story. The point where I went from just taking hit after hit to actually standing my ground. You know what I mean. It was like realizing the bully who's been shoving you around has been doing it right in front of a security camera the whole time. So I got organized. I tightened up the cameras, backed up every clip, made a written timeline of every interaction, every notice, every knock on the door. I started talking to neighbors and found out I wasn't the first person she'd tried this with, just the first one who had the tech and the stubbornness to push back. Miss Ida, 3 houses down, had audio recordings of Beverly threatening to use every HOA resource to drive your grandson out of here. The couple on the corner had a folder full of fines for things the board never even voted on. All of it painted a picture of a woman who thought the HOA bylaws were her personal weapon. Then the certified letter arrived. Petition for order of protection. Beverly asking the court for a restraining order against me and against Elena, claiming we were stalking her, monitoring her movements, using implied legal authority to intimidate her. She'd listed 3 board members as witnesses, asked for an emergency hearing, signed it all under oath like she truly believed she'd always be the one telling the story. When Elena read it, her face went very calm in that way, where you know somebody's not okay, but they're also in full control. "These are sworn statements," she said. "If the judge decides she lied, that's a problem for her, not for you." My attorney Rachel took one look and said, "This is the part in the movie where the villain keeps digging even after they hit the gas line." A week later, we found out what she meant. We walked into that courthouse together, but from that point on, we weren't husband and wife. Not in that room, we were 2 people on very different sides of a process. I sat at the defendant's table with Rachel, my binders of evidence lined up and hand a-sweating, heart racing in this weird mix of dread and relief, because at least now we weren't hiding from letters in the mailbox. At least now we were in a place with rules. Beverly sat at the other table dressed like she was at some corporate board meeting, apers, stacked neatly, her 3 witnesses behind her, their shoulders up around their ears, and a local reporter sat near the back with a notebook already open. The bailiff called all rise, and when he said, "The Honorable Judge Elena Ruiz Hanley presiding," I didn't look at Elena. I looked at Beverly. Watching the realization hit her face is something I will probably replay in my head for the rest of my life. She half rose from her chair, eyes wide, mouth open. The papers she was holding slid sideways and fanned out. She looked from me to Elena and back like someone had just changed all the answers on the test. "Your Honor," she blurted, voice high and shaking. "There must be some mistake. That's the woman I'm filing against." Elena sat, adjusted her robe, and looked down from the bench with a calm I'd seen at our kitchen table when she was grading motions. "Ms. Cross," she said, and her voice filled the room. "According to your petition, you have requested a protective order against Michael and Elena Hanley. I am Elena Hanley. You have filed a petition naming a sitting municipal judge as your harasser, and we are here today to review your evidence." The whole room buzzed for a second until the bailiff snapped at everyone to be quiet. Beverly stammered something about not knowing, about just trying to feel safe, but Elena cut her off gently. "Not knowing someone's job title is not a defense for false statements. Ms. Cross, you brought this into a courtroom. This is where we deal with it." Beverly told her story first, and to be honest, it sounded convincing enough if you didn't know the details. She talked about feeling watched, about my truck driving too slow past her house, about cameras aimed into her windows, about Elena giving her hostile looks at the mailbox, about fearing retaliation because they know people in the system. Then Rachel started laying wires into the circuit we built. Body cam footage from the domestic call, showing officers walking into a quiet house, no broken furniture, no crying. Spouse, just a confused judge, and an angry electrician in cuffs with Beverly's shaky voice on the 911 recording, saying she heard screaming and crashing, which simply did not exist on the tape. Video of Beverly at 2 a.m. banging that hose around on the rocks, and then filing a noise complaint about that exact area. Photos of her 4 cars lined up on the curb day after day, while she'd find me for 1 truck parked in my own driveway. Audio of her promising Miss Ida she'd make sure people like him regret ever buying here. When Rachel asked for Beverly's proof that I was stalking her, all she had were grainy phone photos taken from behind her curtains, me walking my dog, Elena getting in her car, my truck parked legally, the kind of thing that made it pretty obvious who was obsessively watching whom. Elena listened to all of it. Didn't interrupt, didn't roll her eyes, didn't do anything except write notes. And when everyone was done, she set her pen down and looked at Beverly. "Ms. Cross, you have accused these defendants of stalking and intimidation," she said. "But the evidence shows a pattern of you surveilling their home, misusing HOA authority, and filing reports that do not match objective reality." Beverly tried one last time. "I was just trying to protect the community," she said, voice small now. And for the first time since I'd met her, she actually looked afraid. Not of me, not of Elena, but of the consequences hanging in the air. "What you did," Elena said, "was use the language of safety to justify harassment. You signed your name to statements that are contradicted by video and witness testimony that is perjury. You called in a fabricated domestic violence report. That is a false report, and you directed this pattern at a judicial officer and her spouse. That is harassment of a judicial officer. This court will not grant your petition. It is denied and dismissed with prejudice, and this matter is being referred to the county attorney for review of possible criminal charges. Attorney's fees for the defendants are assessed to the petitioner." Which the gavel came down one sharp crack, and in that sound, months of fear and sleepless nights and humiliation snapped like a cheap wire under too much load. Beverly stood there for a second, then started stuffing her papers into her fancy briefcase, dropping half of them on the floor, leaving some behind on the table like trash. She walked out past my neighbors without looking at them. The board members followed her at a distance, and the reporter's pen couldn't move fast enough. I didn't cheer. There was no slow clap. I just let out this breath. I felt like I'd been holding since the night those red and blue lights first flooded my driveway. Miss Ida squeezed my shoulder on her way out and said, "Bullies hate records, sweetheart. You gave them plenty." Gave them. But later that week, folks told me Beverly resigned from the HOA in a 2-sentence email about health reasons. I heard the county was looking into her reports. I heard the IRS was curious about those short-term rentals. I heard a lot of things. But honestly, the only thing that really mattered to me was that for the first time in a long time, I could sit on my own porch without wondering who was going to show up with a clipboard or a badge. So that's my story. How an HOA president tried to paint my wife as a hooker, tried to get me arrested, tried to use rules and fear to push us out, and how the same system she tried to weaponize ended up turning around on her when the truth finally had a place to stand. Now, I want to ask you something straight. Do you think we went too far? Letting my wife sit that high above a woman who'd tormented us for months? Or did Beverly finally get the exact kind of accountability she'd been dishing out to everyone else for years? You know what I mean? Have you ever seen somebody hide behind standards or values while they were really just bullying people who didn't fit their picture of right? Drop your thoughts in the comments, argue with me. Tell me if you think this was justice or karma or both, and if you've got your own HOA nightmare or power trip story, share it. And if you want more stories where the little guy finally pushes back and wins, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because apparently I've got a lot more to say about people who think a clipboard makes them king.